A disappointing loss for the Cleveland Browns this weekend, falling 24 points to 20 on the road to Seattle. Let's break it all down. The Cleveland Brits podcast.
Dog tail! Dog tail! Same old Browns, boys! Just the same old Browns! Garrett's going to get him, and he knocks the ball away. Caught by Donovan Peoples-Jones! Touchdown! He got it! He got Chubb! He's to the 30, 20, 10, 5, touchdown! Wow, what a struggle. The way it should be, I guess. Brownies, here we go! Woo, woo. Here we go, Brownies!
Yes, as I said before the music, a bit of a disappointing weekend after a couple of weeks of highs. But nevertheless, we will break it all down regardless. Joined for the first time in what seems like a while by Owain. How you doing, buddy?
I'm all right. Yeah, it does feel like a while. It's only been like a week or two, but that's a long time in Browns fandom, isn't it? So,
Jesus Christ, mate. An hour is a long time in Browns fandom sometimes, let alone a week. So, yeah, like you say, plenty has gone on between the last time we spoke. But let's get straight into it, mate. A game that ultimately, me and Josh previewed it earlier in the week, and I sort of said we can talk all night, but ultimately this will no doubt come down to the final possession of the game. And ultimately, that's exactly where we ended up, the final possession of the game. This time, though, unfortunately, the Browns couldn't get it done, and obviously come out on the wrong end of the result. But a game, mate, that was very, very uneven, I think is the best way I'd describe it. A really poor start, a pretty good then 2, maybe 3 quarters worth of football, or 2 3/4 worth of quarters of football. But then a final drive disaster yet again. So lots of positives, lots of negatives, mate. Let's start off though chronologically. Let's open up in terms of how the game started. And defensively, mate, we looked quite poor out the gate, didn't we? It's been a couple of weeks running now where we've suffered from big plays being put up against us. We had a big catch for DK Metcalf. We had a big run for Kenneth Walker. The Seattle Seahawks had got 17 points on the board by the end of the first quarter. So they were absolutely dominant. A real poor start for the defense, man. It looked like Seattle was going to march the ball up and down the field all day at will.
yeah, it did. It was a really worrying start, really, when you look at it. Seattle have obviously got a great deal of weapons at their disposal, and they used them really well to begin with, didn't they? I think we struggled a little bit getting enough pressure on Geno Smith. I think we got around him a couple of times without getting him to the floor, and especially on the touchdown to Lockett in the corner of the end zone. Obviously, Smith did get his hands on Geno, and he sort of evaded him and then threw a really nice deep ball into the end zone for a touchdown. But yeah, coming out the gate and those 2 touchdowns happening so early, you feared for the way this game was going. And me and you have spoken before this season about in seasons previous we'd have seen a lot of quit from this team, and I thought that this may be the week that we saw it. It didn't go that way, which is great, and I'm sure we'll touch on plenty of positives today. But yeah, it was a sloppy start, and you look at it further on down, in the game, and you think if maybe one of those touchdowns weren't scored, then the game could have been completely different. But obviously, it's all ifs, buts, and maybes. When you're speaking about it the day after.
Yeah, isn't hindsight a wonderful thing? But yeah, like you say, difficult opening couple of series. Greg Newsome in particular had a difficult time. Look, Tyler Lockett is a shifty receiver, and he can get separation, it seems, against most in the league. And he does have these kind of games, doesn't he, where he absolutely dominates the box score. After those opening 2 drives, he went relatively quiet. Well, the whole of the Seattle offense went relatively quiet, didn't it, for different reasons, which we'll touch on. But certainly there was a lot of Tyler Lockett on that opening couple of drives. But as you say, mate, plenty of fight from the Browns. And the encouraging thing was, although they sort of went 14 down on the scoreboard, because what has become a staple, unfortunately, for this offense was another turnover led to a short field for Seattle. This time it was a fumble. Blitz coming from the blind side, not picked up by anybody, not recognised pre-snap. I think PJ Walker sort of owned that one in the post-game press conference, as sort of most quarterbacks probably would. But obviously a good blitz that came in from Jordan Brooks. I thought Brooks and Wagner had pretty decent games for the Seahawks yesterday. And Brooks came in from the blind side, and that was the sack, and like I say, strip sack, and all of a sudden it was 14-0. The drive, though, mate, that then preceded that was the Browns' first touchdown drive of the game. And if we want to start talking about some of the positives, this drive was excellent, wasn't it? It was exactly what was needed in terms of ultimately resulting in a touchdown, but also the manner in which it was done. You know, it was a quick drive of just over 2 minutes of sort of game clock, and all of a sudden the Browns were right back in. It finished off with a brilliant bit of play calling, I think, to get David Njoku completely free across the middle. It was an 18-yard touchdown, of which I think probably 14 yards came after the catch, when he pretty much walked into the end zone. I know there was a tackle that came in on about the 2-yard line, and Njoku sort of managed to keep his body up above the tackler. But it was just a really good drive, mate. Lots of screen thrown in there. Kareem Hunt had a screen, Pierre Strong had a screen, and I suppose technically you'd call the Njoku play a bit of a screen as well. But 3 really good plays there, back to back, mate. And all of a sudden, like I said, the Browns marched down the field. That was a mightily impressive drive, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was really fun to watch, actually, wasn't it? Obviously, explosive plays with the screen passes is something that Kevin Stefanski has done really, really well since taking charge of the Browns. I think we touched on it actually a couple of weeks ago, didn't we? That the season that we did get to the playoffs, there was an awful lot of screen passes thrown, and they were incredibly effective. And since then, we've sort of not seen as many, and we were wondering when they were sort of going to come back. So it was really nice to see yesterday. Obviously, you can't go through a whole game just throwing screen passes, because eventually you're just going to start getting stuffed. And there was one screen pass sort of later on in the game to Njoku, which he did actually bust off for a big gain that did almost get, wrapped up for a decent loss. But then obviously you make something happen after it. But, I think, listeners of the podcast will know what side of the fence we fall on when it comes to Kevin Stefanski. But I thought yesterday, he was immense for, 59 minutes of that game. I thought he was absolutely immense. And to get, the production that he did out of PJ Walker, you look at PJ Walker's box score, stats yesterday, and if you take away the interceptions, which I don't think you can necessarily put them on Kevin Stefanski, if you take away those interceptions, you'd be looking at an absolutely unbelievable day from a quarterback who didn't have a job a month ago. So, I thought he was immense yesterday. I thought that drive was one of the most fun drives that you're going to see as a Browns fan, in terms of just the efficiency. Every play called on that drive seemed like a slam dunk positive play. So it was a really good, fun drive to watch. And I think that set the offense up for the rest of the game, and, in the same vein, really.
Yeah, I agree. And it was really important because, like I say, it kind of made sure that Cleveland were in the game. It had a chance of spiraling completely out of control. That obviously pulled it back to 14-7. Seattle would tag on a field goal to get 17-7 clear. But then came the period of the game that the Browns then took over and dominated, because it went from 17-7 behind all the way up to a 20 points to 17 lead at one stage. And I thought this was where the Browns really did sort of come into their own. Some excellent play from the defense. All right, so like I say, it's a little bit concerning that it's taking some time for this defense to seemingly heat up in games. But the preceding drives after those 3 scoring ones were 3 and out for a punt, 3 and out for a punt, a 7-play drive which had covered 48 yards and ended in an interception. That was right at the end of the half, with Martin Emerson stepping in front of DK Metcalf. And an important pick at the time, because that obviously kept points off the scoreboard, meant it was only a 3-point deficit at the half. In the second half, the Seahawks went punt on a 3-and-out, an interception again on a 3-and-out, a punt, 3-and-out, an 8-play drive covering 42 yards, which ended in a punt after a Myles Garrett sack on 3rd down, which was huge and felt like it could have been, a bit of a game clincher potentially. But obviously, it didn't end up that way because, as I say, the killer drive was the one right at the end. But before we get too far to the end of the game, mate, let's talk about this period where the Browns really did sort of start to dominate on both sides of the ball. I thought the offense did incredibly well yesterday for large portions of the game. I thought David Njoku was heavily involved yesterday, was a real signature piece of the offense. I think if you look at the running back committee, I think they all individually did a more than decent job. Kareem Hunt was the leading rusher in terms of yardage. He had 55 yards on 14 carries. But I thought Pierre Strong showed some nice burst. He had 41 yards on his 10 carries, and Jerome Ford 37 on his 9. I thought Ford's usage was a little bit strange. He seemed to get the first sort of play, or one of the first sort of plays in sometimes the first quarter, and then he seemed to go missing again until like the 3rd or 4th quarter, which was a little bit peculiar. It almost felt like, they've brought him back, but he's not quite ready, so they're going to go with Hunt and Strong. But ultimately, they all ended up with a similar amount of carries. But PJ Walker carried the ball quite nice as well, a couple of design runs for him. So the run game was certainly a big part of it, mate. But there was enough PJ Walker sprinkled in there in terms of the pass game. I thought he stood in the pocket pretty well. He took some big shots at times, when he sort of hung in there and delivered some really important passes. It's a strange one with PJ Walker because he seems to be better on the medium to deeper ball than he does necessarily on the shorter one, in terms of where he requires a little bit of touch and a bit of finesse, because one of his interceptions was a bit of an ugly one, if we're honest, towards Njoku. It was almost a phenomenal play, obviously, for Njoku. It felt as though it could have been a miraculous recovery. Obviously, I think the rules analyst on Fox sort of clarified it, that even if he hadn't touched the player, it would have been classed as down by contact anyway, as the player was on the ground when the ball would have been taken away. But it was a really decent performance, that middle stretch of the game, wasn't it? It really got the Browns obviously competitive in the game in terms of on the scoreboard. Dustin Hopkins has almost become just guaranteed. I know his 2 field goals yesterday weren't exactly huge distance-wise, but another good week for him. So plenty of positives to take away, mate, from an offense that's obviously got its limitations at the minute, but all things considered, did a very reasonable job, I thought, throughout probably 2/3 of this game.
Yeah, I thought they were phenomenal. Like I said earlier, I thought Kevin Stefanski schemed up such a good performance, and he put his players in a really good spot for the majority of this game, which is all you can really ask of a play caller and a head coach. So again, really encouraging signs from him. It's frustrating, really, isn't it? Like watching, like you said, PJ Walker threw some tidy deep balls, like you said, but on the short stuff where you'd expect any QB in the league to be accurate, really. That's where he killed the Browns really yesterday. That short pass, like you said, to Njoku, which he just sailed. And then obviously it's a slant route to finish the game, which eventually costs us the game as well. So it would just be nice to see Kevin Stefanski have a QB that just doesn't make catastrophic mistakes seemingly every game, wouldn't it? I think you go back to the good year he had with Baker. Baker was quite tidy with the ball. The majority of the wins that the Browns had a positive turnover differential. I don't think for the first season, at least, I don't think the Browns actually lost with a positive turnover differential under Kevin Stefanski, if I'm not mistaken. But since then, the QBs just give the ball away way too much. You see Baker the year after give the ball away way too much. Obviously, Jacoby did okay last year, I would say, in that regard, which is exactly why everyone's clamoring to have him back, because he was just tidy. He wasn't special. He was just tidy. And then obviously Watson is, I don't want to go too deep in on Watson because it's a touchy subject for a lot of people. But I would say he's underperformed quite considerably, and he's been wasteful with the ball. Obviously, you saw last week 2 interceptions or maybe 1 interception and another 2 that could have easily been interceptions within 5 plays, and Walker's gone and thrown 7 in what is 3 games as a Browns QB. So it'd just be nice to see Kevin Stefanski have a quarterback that can just be tidy, not give the ball away in crucial situations. Because it just feels like they could be so good in that case. Like we've spoken, I know we haven't touched on one of the last drives here yet, but we've spoken about the one where he just, he's come out obviously in the last couple of weeks and said that whenever Cooper's one-on-one, he's just going to throw him the ball. And to be honest, at the time when he said that, I thought, why have you gone and said that? Because defenses are going to key in on that now straight away. If that's what you're going to do, every time Amari Cooper's one-on-one, the DB is just going to know that the ball's coming at him. So I found it a peculiar thing to say when he said it, and I thought yesterday was quite costly. He left a touchdown on the board to Elijah Moore on a really, really easy crossing route, which Stefanski again schemed up really well. But yeah, just the QB is such a big issue for the Browns at the moment, and I think with some tidy play, you could see the Browns offense putting up 30 points a game. I really do think that.
Yeah, there's definitely some talent there, isn't there? And like you say, the drive that you alluded to in terms of the touchdown potentially left off the board is the drive that put Cleveland up 20 points to 17 when Hopkins kicked the field goal. But as you say, very clear to see on the all-22, and it was sort of highlighted, I think, on the replay in the game broadcast afterwards, that Elijah Moore was certainly open and was walking into the end zone. Let's put it that way. It wasn't too far out of where PJ Walker was actually looking in. He was at the same side of the field as Amari Cooper, so it wasn't like he got to scan the entire field either. But anyway, be that as it may, let's talk a little bit on the defense before we get to the end of the game, because I know that's where everybody's focus has been in terms of today. This period in the middle, mate, complete domination yet again. Absolutely excellent. Can't fault it whatsoever. All right, those 6 drives that I talked about that resulted in 7 drives that I talked about resulted in 5 punts and 2 interceptions. Phenomenal work. Seattle limited to just over 100 yards of offense in those 7 drives. It ultimately meant the Browns absolutely dominated the time of possession and all of those kind of good things. So some really encouraging stuff. Wasn't a huge day in terms of sack numbers. All right, I thought Seattle did a good job in terms of getting the ball out quickly. I think there was a few that were left on the field. I thought Zadarius Smith had a couple of opportunities yesterday, and that's been a little bit of a disappointing trade, if we're honest, in terms of the actual production that's come from Zadarius Smith. I'm not a huge stat guy, as you know. Like I say, I like to look behind the stats, but ultimately, Zadarius Smith's not necessarily, living up to the expectations that are there. I'm always impressed when Ogbo's on the field. I think you instantly see an uptick in terms of production. I think we're getting close to the stage where he starts out snapping Zadarius Smith if it starts to or continues in this trend, because you've got Zadarius Smith basically for the end of this year. There's nothing guaranteed thereafter. I think Ogbo is certainly playing himself into a bigger role on this defense because he seems to be taking the most of his opportunities. Talking of making the most of your opportunities as well, mate, Maurice Hurst. He has been an absolute revelation, hasn't he? Just want to give a special shout out to him because that pick, mate, I mean, that was an athletic play for a defensive tackle, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think a few people when he got signed, I wasn't one of them, but I think a few people when he got signed at the start of the season sort of said, if this guy can stay healthy, then he's got a shot at being really good. And he's done both so far. He's stayed healthy and he has been very, very good. And to be fair to AB, he has picked up these obscure defensive tackles since he's been there. He's picked up a couple of them that have been, half tidy. Obviously, Malik. I'm struggling with his last name, but Malik, the one that got in trouble.
Malik
McDowell, there we go. He picked him up as a free agent, and he actually did really well. He just obviously wasn't well off the field. I think you could put it mildly. So yeah, I think AB has got a little bit of a talent and a bit of a knack at defensive tackle of picking up these obscure players that maybe it hasn't worked out well elsewhere and just plugging them in and them doing pretty well. So I think we've seen the San Francisco 49ers do something really similar over the last few years, picking up, high draft pick defensive lineman and then turning them into something really good. So if the Browns can get a little conveyor belt of those going, that would be really good. And Hurst has taken his opportunity, hasn't he, with both hands. Shelby Harris was probably a bigger signing when he actually did come than Hurst was, but Hurst has outplayed him massively. So, hats off to him. And I think, touching on the Smith thing just for a second, I think it's a bit of a weird one, isn't it? Because he has actually contributed a lot of pressure, and he did yesterday. He was in the backfield a lot yesterday and just hasn't converted that into sacks at the minute, which, history would tell you that will come. That will come, but we need it to start coming sooner rather than later, I think. And especially the hurtful thing was that maybe if he did convert a couple of those pressures in the early going yesterday, then again the game could have panned out a little bit differently. But hopefully they start to come soon. I think the D line is going to get a massive chance to go and cause havoc next week. So hopefully it does.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Like you say, he just felt like he was just half a step away yesterday. It did feel costly. It's not for a lack of effort, like you say, so hopefully they start actually turning into positives. Right, man, let's get to the end of the game because it's obviously what's been on everybody's lips all throughout the course of the day. So I mentioned that Myles Garrett has the big sack on the third down play, which means that Seattle's drive, although looking as though they may well get into field goal range and potentially kick a game-time field goal. They got the way to our 41-yard line, and then Myles Garrett came through with a huge sack. Didn't actually realise, I believe it was also, he forced a fumble as part of that sack, but Gino apparently was credited with recovering it, which I didn't realise at the time. But the Garrett sack pushed them back, so the Seahawks punted back to the Browns. Fair catch, or certainly downed inside Cleveland's 11. So Browns got the ball with 5:46 to play. Now, it was a drive that was basically pretty much all run. So went 6 yards, Jerome Ford, 5 yards, PJ Walker, 3 yards Ford, 4 yards Ford. They attempted a pass on 3rd and 3, which ended up getting an illegal use of hands play. And I've got to be honest, I hate these calls. It was on the opposite side of the field. Nobody was even looking at DPJ when that ball was thrown. So for another week, we got a bit of help from the Zebras, and you're kind of thinking PJ Walker's got a bit of a charmed life here because it's just extended yet another Browns drive. They then go 2 yards with PJ Walker on the ground, 5 yards with Pierre Strong. Now, if you want to be really critical, I think where the Browns started to go wrong here is that play that I just said there, the 5 yards with Pierre Strong. And the reason I say that's where it starts to go wrong is they run that play with 2 minutes 50 seconds left on the clock. They could have run that play with 2 minutes 40 seconds left on the clock. And that would have meant that you would have got down to the 2-minute warning. Now, in the grand scheme of things, we're talking the matter of seconds. But I do fundamentally think it probably changes mindset and approach from Seattle and potentially from the Browns. And you've got 2 minutes warning, which is an extended timeout effectively to talk over whatever play call you want to make. Now, the key thing is, mate, as I say, we were in 3rd and 3, no more than 3 plays earlier, and the ball was thrown, and no one's saying a damn thing about it, because surprisingly, we got a penalty, and everybody forgets about it because the chains get moved. However, the next time we throw it on 3rd and 3, now obviously, as you mentioned, and it is a little bit of an issue, the intended target is Amari Cooper. Probably everybody on the field understands that the intended target is going to be Amari Cooper. And because the Seattle Seahawks know the intended target is Amari Cooper, that means that certainly, and everybody could see it, I think, in the game replay, Jerome Ford had just basically snuck out the backfield, stood at the sticks, and he was wide open. David Njoku broke out to the flat on the left-hand side of the formation, and he was wide open. There is no doubt in my mind, and I'm sure in your mind, that a simple throw to either of those two results in those 3 yards being collected. You go to the 2-minute warning with the Browns in possession of the football, and things look totally, totally different. Now, obviously, Walker's intention is the slant route to Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper's actually in pretty decent position, and we'll never know whether the pass gets completed or not. Me and you've exchanged a few text messages on this earlier. It's an extremely tight window, all right? So I'm not trying to defend the throw. There were certainly easier throws to be made. But let's not pretend that there wasn't a chance that pass could have been completed, all right? All I have heard all day is this now, we should have run the ball. I was screaming at the telly to run the ball, this, that, and the other. I'm the world's biggest run the ball advocate. You know that, all right? Me and you've argued about it many a time, right? The only thing I was screaming at my TV last night, and I'm sure you were the same, is get a first down. I didn't care whether it came through the air. I didn't care whether it went on the ground. Everyone assumes it goes on the ground. You're not fumbling the ball. The Browns have given up plenty of fumbles this year. There's no guarantee. All right. Ultimately, and this is where I think come back to the clock management in terms of not getting it down to the 2-minute warning. I think the Browns almost, because they weren't at that stage, probably it added some layers of complication that they didn't necessarily need at that stage. I might be splitting hairs. It might have made no great deal of difference, but I think ultimately that's where they first made the bit of the cock up. But for everybody, whether you like the guy, dislike the guy, that's fine. But let's not pretend that there was a poor play call when you had two people wide open. Potentially the guy that was read number one could have received the pass. How many times is that ball going to get thrown, hit that helmet, balloon up in the air, and fall right in the bucket of a Seattle Seahawks defender? If it hits the helmet and hits the floor, people might moan about it, but you still get your punt away, and we're now different to potentially running up the gut for no gain. All right, so let's not crucify the head coach who's just called a phenomenal game, as you rightly said, for 59 minutes, because a little bit of bad luck, and yeah, again, I'm not excusing it, the wrong read was taken, but ultimately, that's why this quarterback was sitting on the streets a few weeks ago, and he wasn't in an NFL team, mate. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I think you're spot on. I think, to be honest, I think I said it on a podcast a couple of weeks ago. Last time we lost a game was, I think the anger is just really misguided at the minute. Like, I get it. This whole situation that we've got going on at QB, and it's really frustrating. And I understand anger and frustration about it. I understand anger and frustration that we've been in these situations before, and it seems like another lost season may be coming if that situation doesn't get sorted out. But that doesn't excuse the fact that, like you said, Stefanski called an exemplary game for 99% of that game yesterday. And then, I don't even think you can say that he cocked it up at the end. Like, it's one of them. Like you said, there's just a massive slice of bad luck. He's called a play that there's multiple players open. Like, that's all you can really ask of a play caller, and you just need your QB to, again, not focus in on one receiver out of 5 that are running routes, and just pick the best option. And he, whether he picked the worst option or whatever, looking at the still shots, and even before the still shots, I think you can see on the replay behind him straight away that the Ford is there for an easy completion and a check down and a first down. So, like you said, I hadn't even thought about the point that we've fumbled quite a lot on runs this season. Like, you take away, the fact that they could easily stuff the run because that's what they're expecting anyway. And like you said, a catastrophe could happen with a fumble as well. So, unless you want the Browns to take a knee and then punt the ball away and be in good field position, there's no real way that you can guarantee anything from that third down. So I find it easy to see why people are angry, because you're reactionary to what's happened and the outcome of what's happened, and it's easy to be angry at the fact that's probably lost us a game. But at the same time, like, as we see Pete, yeah, but like, I'm just reading a comment that we've had in from Pete Barker now. That Sean just put on the screen. run it. It might not work out, but you don't cough up the ball at worst, punt it. But Sean just made the point that we have been wasteful and we have given the ball away on runs plenty this season. And we haven't even touched on the fact, by the way, that once Seattle get the ball back, they torched our defense so comfortably. Didn't even use the whole 2 minutes that they needed. They still have 40 odd seconds left when they score the touchdown. Do we really think that an extra 20 yards changes that game? Because I certainly don't. I think we punt the ball away on 4th and 1 or whatever the case may be. I still think the Seattle are marching down the field with how soft our defense was on that last drive. I think they're marching down the field and at the very least taking it to overtime, but likely they just finish us off the same way. So I really don't mind throwing the ball and trying to kill the game there. I can understand people that want to run the ball there. I don't care either way. Like you said, just won the first down, and whatever way you're going to get there, you're going to get there. And
Yeah. I always think we just get lost in the mud with these debates and conversations because ultimately it always boils down to execution. There was nothing wrong with the play call. As you said, if I've got a head coach that's called a play call and I've got 2 men open to get me that first down, then I've got no issue with the play call. The issues with the execution, but like I say, a huge slice of luck. Just in terms of what you were coming to, mate, and like I say, I won't going to sort of skip it because, like you say, you then fast forward, that's been and gone. They get good field position. They start at the 43-yard line, but as I say, they've done nothing on offense all second half. And this is again, I think this just comes back to another situation where the time on the game, the situation, the general thing you would normally do in terms of clock management. The Seattle Seahawks moved the ball quickly. They went 7 yards to Tyler Lockett. They then went 9 yards to DK Metcalf, 27 yards to Noah Fant. And then they almost had a touchdown on the next play, which ended up as incomplete. I think if we're being honest, Denzel Ward got a little bit fortunate in terms of his coverage. I know it ended up looking like a decent play. But I think with a better thrown ball, I think Denzel Ward's probably beaten there. It felt to me like the Browns' defensive line was just about getting back in its stance and the ball was snapped again. That was an opportunity for me to start using some of the Browns' timeouts that they had got because the important thing was it's no well and good saving your timeouts for your offense if your offense get back on the field, but ultimately you've got a chance to win the game if you just get the defense playing this drive and this series right, or worst case scenario, you're limiting them to the 3 points. And I just thought that again, we seemed gassed, we seemed confused. There was that ridiculous situation where we ended up with 13 men on the field on defense. 12 is inexcusable, but it happens from time to time. But how on earth did we end up with 13 men on the field from a defensive point of view? And it just felt like for that brief moment, and don't get me wrong, this is where I will be critical of Stefanski, and this is where I will be critical of the coaching staff, because it is in these key moments and these big situations that everything does get overanalyzed, and it's these things that you need to absolutely get right. And I just felt like the Browns just panicked because of the turnover, because they were giving them sort of in the way, if you like, of decent field position, that ultimately it just ended up, like you say, it felt as though they could have given them another length of a football field, and the way that drive went, it would have been executed. But that's really strange to say that because we just shut it down for 3 quarters. I just thought it was really poorly executed from the minute that ball was intercepted to, unfortunately, the end of the game. The last minute and 57 seconds were pretty disastrous, weren't they, mate?
yeah, they were, and I think you are spot on again with what you say about the timeouts because realistically, you're looking at it and you're thinking, right, if we save our timeouts here and they, best case scenario, if they do score the touchdown and give us 1 minute left, are we likely even with three timeouts when the Seattle Seahawks know that we're going to pass the ball? Are we going to drive up the field with PJ Walker to at least kick a field goal and take it to overtime? Likelihood is no. So you might as well, like you say, just give the defense an extra breather, let them get set, let them get in their stance, and let them get after Geno Smith a little bit, easier, you would say. These things are nitpicking, aren't they? But at the end of the day, the margins are so fine. We've seen that time and time again this season. Normally, it's gone our way, but yesterday just didn't. I think when it doesn't go your way, you tend to pick up these things a little bit more. I do think, it's probably important we touch on what Pete put up there, because I think that's been a real point of discussion over the last, obviously 2 weeks. He says, now do we use some of our 30 million plus saved cap to get a better backup QB? And, my answer to that has been the same for the last 2 weeks. I just think that people, I've even asked some people when this has been brought up, okay, we go out and get a new backup QB, who are we going to get? And then they tend to come back with, I'll just get someone. And I think that's quite a telling answer, because you can't just get like usable QBs. They're not just floating about out there. That's why we gave up 3 first-round picks plus 230 million plus whatever else we gave up for a QB that hadn't played in 2 years. They're rare. The ones that go and win you games, they're rare. And yeah, you can point to Jacoby Brissett, who's, possibly available, but the thing is, do you give up a 3rd-round pick, which, you can have your opinions about picks all you want, but at the end of the day, when you're paying your QB as much as what we are, you're going to need young talent on your team. We haven't got all that many picks already this season, so you're gonna burn a 3rd-round pick for the sake of one game. I just don't think it's all that realistic, and I think you see a load of it bandied around on Twitter and stuff, and Facebook or whatever this week, and I just don't see it. And I think it's prudent for us to touch on it here and maybe touch on the trade deadline, because there's a lot of chatter going around Browns wise, when it comes to Jacoby Brissett or whoever a QB, and then obviously, there's been a lot of rumors saying we're after a wide receiver. So it'd be interesting, me getting your thoughts. I think we're quite aligned in our thought about a backup QB, but if you could touch on the wide receiver versus running back versus O-line versus whatever, if you even think we should be getting someone at the trade deadline.
Yeah, I think for me and Pete, firstly, thanks, mate, for watching along, and thanks for the interaction. We always appreciate the comments and the questions, and it is all about opinion at the end of the day. Ultimately, we're all entitled to an opinion, and we've certainly got differences of opinion within the podcast, and certainly across the people we interact with on Facebook and Twitter and all the rest of it. I think from my perspective, I agree with what you've just said there about the backup quarterback situation, and I pointed a few of these out, in a debate that I was having earlier. You look around the league, if you've got a quarterback that's been paid huge money, and let's put Deshaun Watson in that category because it is huge money. I know some people think that the contract doesn't matter. I genuinely can't get on board with that. I just don't understand how that thought process exists. But some people think it doesn't. To me, it does, and I think it should. And the reason it does is if you look at the other quarterbacks in the same scenario, Joe Burrow's backed up by Jake Browning. Matthew Stafford is backed up by Stetson Bennett. Kyle Allen is the backup to Josh Allen. Blaine Gabbert is the backup to Patrick Mahomes. There is a huge, huge drop-off between your QB1 and your QB2, as you would absolutely expect. The teams that have got better backup quarterbacks are the teams that have got a developmental guy that's starting. So you sort of talk about Sam Howell is backed up by Jacoby Brissett because they want that veteran in the building. They want the expertise. They want the names. They want someone that's been around the league, etc., etc. You've got, the journeyman, the likes of Andy Dalton, who's the backup at Carolina, because again, they've got a QB that they brought in and they want somebody with that veteran presence. So there's all these guys that potentially are quote unquote available. I've heard other names mentioned. We had a debate today about Matt Ryan. I joke, well, look, he's in the CBS studio and he's in there for a reason. Matt Ryan had his last decent season 6 years ago. And if Matt Ryan can come in and win a game or two, then, well, great. But does that help the Browns in the long run? Probably not. I think the biggest issue that we've got, and Pete hits the nail on the head here, is it all depends on the length of Watson's injury. And this is where the Browns are seriously screwed at the minute, because it obviously seemed to everybody in the organisation that he was going to play against the Baltimore Ravens. Let's not forget about this. This was a month ago that he was going to play that day, and he didn't. And then they've had to do some jiggery-pokery. Will he, won't he? Will he play? All right, he's back against the Colts, and he's lasted 2 drives, and he's gone again. Now, we don't even know if he's going to play this week. I would guess probably not, and I think the prudent thing is you'd look at the fixture and you'd hope that you've got enough to beat the Cardinals. and you rest him and bringing him back for the divisional games probably makes the most sense. So to your point, I wouldn't waste any capital on a QB because hopefully Deshaun Watson comes back certainly in a fortnight's time at the latest and actually starts to play like the quarterback you want him to be. I think if we're honest, and me and you certainly don't mind sharing this opinion, I think there's a lot of Browns fans that want the trade for Jacoby Brissett so Jacoby Brissett becomes the starter because his play is that good. All right. I think that's the reality. And a lot of Browns fans might want to not admit that, but I think that is probably part of it as well, that there is this huge clamour for anybody but Watson. All right. The reality is we're stuck with it. We made our bed. We've got to lie in it. We've got to deal with it as a fan base. I hate it. I know you hate it. But we are where we are. In terms of the other positions, mate, I'll be going for anything that potentially improves the team and it improves it in the longer term. All right. We've talked a lot about wide receiver. All right. I think this wide receiver room needs some work. I think there's some decent individual players in there. I don't think we've quite got the combinations right. I think we could certainly do with somebody that has got that vertical threat that I don't think we necessarily have. I think Marquise Goodwin, it just hasn't worked out. Again, wasn't targeted in the passing game. Yesterday, ran a terrible -5 yard reverse, which to be fair wasn't necessarily his fault. It was well played by the Seahawks. But that seems to be all we're trying to get from Marquise Goodwin is the odd play, try and utilise him in space. He's not really taking the top off the defence. I'd be interested in a receiver that adds a different type of skill set. I think we may as well be honest and say that DPJ may become part of any trade package. Or again, he might be a player that if the Browns could get a 5th or 6th or something like that, they may well look to just make that move. Whether there's anything coming back in return or not, if we're being honest at this point, you may as well dress Cedric Tillman and see what you've drafted as keep playing DPJ and not really involving him as part of the game plan, because that was, again, essentially what happened yesterday. I think in terms of the line, you'd probably be looking at tackle. I thought it was encouraging yesterday. James Hudson had his first meaningful snaps for a while, held up pretty well. Jones has played well. Hudson's a young tackle, but Conklin's injury history. Jedrick Wills, you've got question marks whether that's going to be anything after the end of this year. I know they've picked up the 5th-year option. Doesn't necessarily guarantee anything. I'd be surprised if he wasn't on the Browns next year, but it can be moved on from. But the one thing I would say is, and again, just to address the point that Pete brought up about this 30 million of saved cap, let's not forget, if we don't spend that 30 million this year, it means we can roll it over to next year. And this is where I struggle with this, the contract doesn't matter philosophy. The contract does matter because they need to keep rolling this cap over to afford to pay for that contract as well as everything else they want to do. And that's where the simple mathematics of it come in. You spend 15 million on improving this roster now for the next few weeks, and then you can't spend that 15 million next year. So that's the other thing I would say to any sort of backup quarterback. All right. And anybody thinking, and I don't think Matt Ryan's the answer at all, do not think he's at all, would be absolutely have zero interest in my opinion. But if that's the opinion you've got, that's absolutely fine. If you think Matt Ryan is coming out the CBS booth in the middle of November for a veteran minimum salary, I think you are very, very seriously mistaken. All right. He's going to demand some serious money. He's not going to be getting Patrick Mahomes money. He's not going to be getting Deshaun Watson money. I'm not talking that kind of crazy. But he's not going to be coming in for a few $100,000, is he, mate? He's going to want a few million. That eats into what you want to do. And like you just said, ultimately, let's hope Deshaun's back in a week's time. And that's the end of the conversation in terms of the backup quarterback. I think the issue is bigger when it comes to our QB situation, as you know.
And I think you're spot on. I think the reason why people don't necessarily think the contract matters and that we've just got this £30 million and we can use it however we please with no repercussions. I think it's because we've been in a spot for the last, ever since I've been a fan of the Browns, we've been in a spot of having no problems with the cap whatsoever. And I think now that we're in a spot where this is uncharted territory for us, having paid a QB a lot of money, we've never really been in the situation of having to, save in other areas to because we've invested that. So I think it's a little bit of that first time, into the unknown sort of thing where maybe next year and the year after people have realized, okay, this is the effect that decision has had on the entire roster, and it'll be a lot clearer to see because all of that rolled over cap will be gone. Watson's cap hit won't be as low as what it is now. I think I can't remember what it is now, but I know it's really low. And next season it jumps up to like 60 million. So I think that's probably what you have to think of when it turns to the discussion about that cap space we have. Just to touch on the trade deadline from my perspective. I've seen a load of tweets earlier and load of stuff on social media the last couple of days about we really don't need a wide receiver. That's not going to fix the passing game. Why don't they go get a running back? Why don't they go get an offensive tackle? I don't think they'll go get an offensive tackle because they don't get traded. Like decent ones don't get traded at this point in the season. You never ever see it. Never ever see it. Running back, I thought yesterday was really encouraging from a running back's perspective. I thought running back by committee worked really, really well yesterday. Strong looked really good yesterday. Ford looked better. Kareem Hunt looks like he has got some juice left, which is nice to see. And they all complement each other pretty well, I think, which is, again, really nice to see, really encouraging. So I don't think anything needs to be done at running back. I don't think anything will be done at offensive tackle. And wide receiver, the way I like to look at it when it comes to wide receiver is if you can improve that wide receiver room, it's not going to automatically fix all the problems in the passing game because ultimately only one thing can do that, and that's Watson coming back and playing well. But it's not going to harm it either. It's gonna help Watson when he comes back play better. And you look at the one name who's been mentioned time and time again for the last, I don't even know how long, maybe coming up for a year now, when it comes to the Cleveland Browns, and that's Jerry Jeudy. And to be honest, I didn't mind it when the rumors started about him. I really don't mind it now, for the simple reason he reminds me a little bit of Coop in the way that he's just open all the time. He hasn't got any physical gifts as such, but he's a really good route runner. I think yesterday you saw that when Russell Wilson did actually target him yesterday, he was open a lot. He made a terrific contested catch at one point over the middle, stretching the field out of the slot. I think when you're looking at trades, when you're looking at giving up things when it comes to the trade deadline, I think you need to do it with a long-term perspective in mind. And I think Jerry Jeudy is that person that can go, okay, when Coop, eventually does lose a little bit of juice, which is probably going to happen over the next couple of years, I would imagine, who have we got to step into that role? And I think you get Jeudy in now, you've got that ready-made replacement. You don't have to worry about that necessarily in time to come. And I think that's why that trade makes sense. The only other one mentioned, I don't think he gets traded because he's been really good actually this season, is Marquise Brown, for the reason that you said. He would give us a dynamic that we haven't necessarily got at the minute in that, deep threat. He's been really good at all levels of the field this season, actually. It's quite surprised me, especially with Josh Dobbs as QB, who, contrary to popular belief, has been terrible this year, by the way. I just want to put that out there. But Marquise Brown's been really good this year. That's why I think they'll keep him, because, they'll probably draft another QB in the draft and they'll need weapons for him. But those are the two names that I would look out for and be excited by if we went out and made a move. I don't think they will make a move, but it's always fun to talk about it this time of year, isn't it?
It certainly is, mate. Yeah, Brown would be the one out of those two. I'd be interested, like you said, just for that different dynamic in terms of the skill set. But completely agree with your point, mate. Anything that you do in these next few days shouldn't be with a real short-term mentality. A couple of things I'll just add as we close. As Pete said, one thing we're not going to do, draft a kicker or trade for a kicker. Absolutely couldn't agree more, mate. And we'll hold our hands up when we were on. Me and I'm very critical of giving up capital, but Dustin Hopkins has probably paid that back already.
And he won us both some money yesterday, Sean, didn't he?
So. He did indeed, mate. I'm £20 richer thanks to Dustin Hopkins today. Absolutely, mate. Yeah, so no, fair play, Pete. Good point. The other thing I would just point out, and let's finish on a real positive, mate. We'll touch on the game preview for the game against the Cardinals later on in the week. It'll be a combination of one of us two, or maybe we'll even get the three of us back on a pod together for the first time in forever. But we'll certainly be back later on in the week. We'll talk about who does or doesn't start. You know, the trade deadline will be in the rearview mirror, and we'll wait and see if there is any changes. I think we're both in agreement that the change at quarterback might come within the roster, or possibly should come from within the roster, and we'll give some of the reasons behind that. But the one thing I want to finish on, just as a real positive to end the podcast, because I've heard this a few times when people keep asking about trading for a different quarterback. Right? PJ Walker is what he is, right? But can we please stop with this talk of we need to make a trade so we have any chance of winning? We are 2-1 in the games that PJ Walker has played, and without Jamal Adams' helmet yesterday, we could easily been 3-0 in the games that PJ Walker has played, and that's despite his limitations. And I am not sort of sitting here saying he's the world's best backup. Far from it. What I'm saying is I don't want the backup to be on the field. I've never known a fan base in a franchise that can't get its starting quarterback position right for 25 years be so obsessed with the bloody backup. Honest to God, you would think we would be affording such luxuries if we're starter, let alone worrying about the guy that backs him up, wouldn't you? But there you go, mate. So whoever plays, fingers crossed, it should hopefully be a return to form. Certainly, I think that's probably where we're trending as we start the week in terms of our thoughts for the game ahead. The Cardinals probably up there with one of the worst teams in football. Certainly record-wise, it is equally the worst. And yeah, like you say, looks like Josh Dobbs again. I think they've said that it'll be at least another week before we get Kyler Murray back. So it will be Josh Dobbs coming back to Cleveland. So let's wait and see. Could be the ultimate battle of the backups, couldn't it? DTR versus Josh Dobbs on First Energy Stadium. That would be interesting, wouldn't it? Right, mate, it's been a pleasure to get back again chatting. But like I say, I know it doesn't seem, it probably doesn't seem that long, but in other ways, with how much goes on in Brown's world, it does feel like a lifetime. Thanks again, Pete, for your interaction during the course of the day, buddy, and appreciate you like the positivity to end the show. As I say, all is not lost. Tough one to take yesterday. Could have gone a different way. It didn't, but the Browns were competitive. That's the least we can ask for, and that's the least we hope for heading into it. Hopefully they turn it around this week. Have a great week, everybody, and go Browns.